Science, exercise, nutrition, health, energy, passion. 1 year, no beer. This is the 1 year no beer podcast, where you will find all the latest tips, tricks, and hacks for a way to live better.
Welcome to the 1 year no beer podcast. I am Rory Fairbairns.
And I'm Andy Ramage.
Good to see you again, Andy. It's been a while.
It has been about 5 minutes.
I love it when we have to record these ones together. But of course, this is next week for all of you out there. So welcome back to another fantastic episode of the 1 year no beer podcast. And this one, particularly special to me because, well, the man we are interviewing today is, of course, from my motherland. And it might not sound like it, because when you hear this guy's accent, you're going to be like, Rory doesn't sound anything like that. But so Josh on today, really excited to hear from him.
Yeah, he's a cracking guest and a real pioneer in the space of mental health. And you'll hear his story, and it's fascinating and also quite harrowing at the same time. He's a guy that, I won't dig too deep into it because I don't want to spoil it, but reached a point where he didn't want to continue with life. You know, as a very young man with the, world at his feet in so many ways, just run out of hope. And you'll hear more of this in the podcast. It was just fascinating, and he gives lots of insight into his experience, and he's turned it around. He's one of these people that's just faced life right at the lowest ebb, and he's bounced back, and now he's devoting his life to helping people, to spread the word, to talk about mental health, and he's an absolute superstar. And he's also on his alcohol-free adventures, which makes it a double whammy for us in terms of his influence and the way he inspires people. And it's just fantastic to get him on the show, and it's a great podcast.
Awesome. So without further ado, let's hear from Josh.
All right, Josh, welcome to the 1 year no beer podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a massive pleasure.
So before we get stuck into the sort of nitty gritty, tell us all about your backstory, because obviously I've been privileged to watch a lot of this online, and lots of our listeners won't know so much about you. So let's go right back to the start. Essentially, how did you reach this point that we're having this podcast today?
Yeah, so the best place to start is probably 2015. In 2015, I entered into a really deep and dark depression. At the end of the previous year, 2014, my girlfriend and I had broken up. We'd been together for a long time, and it's like everybody's been through a breakup at least once in their life. It was just a difficult event to deal with, and for about 6 months I was really depressed and also very suicidal. I'd been thinking about suicide for quite a long time that year, and then just hit a point in the May of 2015 where I thought, like, there's no way I can continue any longer. I'm going to do it. I'd had the idea to go and crash my car. So one night I just went out in the car and crashed at about 80 miles an hour. Somehow walked away from that and survived. And it was after that I was like, right, what the hell am I doing with my life? I've been given a second chance. I need to do something big. And decided I was going to try and cycle around the world.
Right, as you do.
Yeah, because we all know that when you go to your GP and tell them you're depressed, the first thing he'll advise is go and try and cycle around the world.
yeah, that's like standard procedure.
That's standard, but I was never one for convention. I've always been a bit of a maverick. You may be able to say that, and I just knew that I was going to have to do something drastic, and I knew I was going to have to try and change something. And I thought, why not go and try and cycle around the world? And I went away and spent a year cycling, done about 10,000 miles, 14 countries. Then I had my Forrest Gump moment, which was like, I'm ready to go home now. I never wanted to cycle around the world. I wanted to be happy. This bike ride was my journey to happiness. It was a vehicle, and I got everything that I'd ever wanted from it. And by accident, stumbled upon this huge passion for happiness and personal development. I'd read about 70 books since I begun that journey, just all about personal development and happiness, and I just learned so much stuff. And I was like, wow, I want to be talking about this every day. I want to be teaching this. I want to be writing about it. I want to be doing events. And I thought, there's no point in me just being on a bike. The bike served its purpose, but I'm going to come home, and that's what I'll do. And I came home, and I actually struggled at first, because I basically lived for a year cycling 50 miles a day, sleeping in a tent at night, my staple diet of 6 bananas and 3 French baguettes. That was my life for a whole year.
Yeah.
And then I came back home, and I really struggled to fit back into society. And I think anybody who's ever done any long-term travel will tell you that the hardest bit of travel, the biggest challenge, is usually coming home. that's usually the biggest challenge of it, and I struggle.
Talk about this a lot within our mastermind groups that we run and the one-to-one stuff. It's that Stephen Covey, circle of influence, Epictetus, what's really under your control, the great philosophers. It's exactly that. And when you realise what's really under your control, it's just so empowering. And when you realise what's out of your control, which is basically most things outside of your own beliefs, it's empowering also, because then you don't let those things overwhelm you and upset you and bring that anxiety and that depression, because you can't control who loves you. As hard as you try, you can't control your job. As best you can even try and control your health, but you can't guarantee your health or your wealth or your fame and all these things, but you can control your own emotions and your beliefs about those emotions, and then take those proactive measures like you did around diet and alcohol and all these things. That's the best you can do. And that's enough, isn't it? That's enough, I think, to create this environment we're talking about that actually leads to happiness. And I think it's just such a super powerful message. And then sort of building on from that, because I'm really interested in your adventures, because that's, again, how I came across you, was following you doing the cycling and then the Camino. So it was the cycling first, wasn't it? And then was it the sort of walking? What were the big lessons you learned on the cycling trip, for example?
Oh, that's a big question. So to paint the picture of the cycle, right, I want you to imagine this, right? Imagine that you're very depressed, you're overweight, you're unfit, you hate life, and you genuinely just hate life, right? And then you get on a bike and then you start cycling through Europe. You start to feel happy, you start to feel healthy, you're being hosted by amazing people, you're eating all these new foods, you're reading all these books. Like, just imagine that experience.
Yeah.
It was, see, when I talk about that, I actually get quite romantic. I kind of almost look at that. I look at that challenge almost like a first girlfriend, like a high school sweetheart. I'm just so romantic about it. It was just absolutely life changing. It was completely in at the deep end. Like, I was so in at the deep end. When I started that challenge, my whole life, the whole 23 years of my life, I'd lived with my parents. Never moved out for uni, never had a flat, always lived with my parents. And then when I started that challenge, for the first 9 weeks, from my front door in Scotland to Copenhagen, I was hosted every single night by a different family, and I never lived with anybody except my parents. So it was like,
that's amazing.
It was in at the deep end, but it was such a life changing experience. I was meeting all these people. They were giving me food. They were giving me a place to stay. I was hearing all these stories, and it was absolutely life changing. So I think the biggest thing that I learned through the cycling, the original challenge that I done, was that, you know what, the world's actually not a bad place. The world's an amazing place. Like, I had this mindset when I left Scotland that the world was really negative and it was scary and it was dangerous and it was so unequal, and a lot of that can be true. But what I realised is that that's just the minority. Like, the overwhelming majority of people in the world are nice, loving, kind human beings. And I was getting to see the real world. I was getting to go into these people's homes every night and stay with them, and it was life changing. I think also with the cycling as well. When I started that challenge, I wasn't a cyclist. I was overweight. I was unfit, and I didn't know if I could do it. I believed in myself, but I just done it. Like, I woke up every day and I put in the miles, and it was really tough. It was really difficult. But then over time, I started to get really fit. And I remember one of the days when I was in Norway, I cycled to the very highest point in Norway, which is the last piece of dry land before the North Pole. And I cycled there from my front door in Scotland. And I remember that day, getting there, it was still by far the best day of my life, just the feelings I had that day.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that night, like, if I can do that on a bike, like, what else could I do? It just gave me so much confidence for every single area of my life, financially, in my work, with my relationships. Just anything I wanted to do in my life felt possible. Because if I could do that on a bike when I wasn't a cyclist and I was depressed and overweight, like, what could I do when I was happy and actually doing something that, like, I was so passionate about? So that's really what the challenge done for me. It gave me belief in myself, and it showed me that the world was such an amazing place.
Let's just talk about the alcohol situation. So you don't drink at the moment. You're alcohol free at the moment?
Alcohol free.
Legend. And then
not just at the moment, for life. Made the commitment to it. Yeah.
Really? Good man. Yeah, I'm sort of with you all the way on that. And I know when we spoke briefly, you had a really interesting story. And I remember you saying about actually when you slipped up. I don't know if you want to tell that story. It's when you bumped into someone, wasn't it? Yeah.
So my relationship with alcohol has been very, very interesting. So just for some context, I started drinking at the age of 12, which is not that unusual in Scotland, in the community where I grew up. I was drinking probably every weekend from 12 until 16. Then at the age of 16, was able to go to pubs. And then from the ages of 16 to 22, it was 3 or 4 times a week for that period. But then I mentioned earlier about the life audit.
Yeah.
When I hit that moment in 2015 where I thought something has to change, something that I don't actually speak about this much, but I can speak about it now because we're on the 1 Year No Beer podcast. It's so relevant. Is that that moment I had where I thought I'm going to change my life actually came when I was in a pub. I can remember exactly where I was sitting. I was sitting in the usual seat. I had a pint of beer. I was looking out the window, and my whole life I've loved alcohol. Like, I loved it so much. I was the party guy. I loved it. I loved a night out more than anything in the world. Right, that was me. But then I remember getting to a point where it just didn't do anything for me anymore.
Yeah.
I remember sitting with the beer, looking at it, and going, there must be more to life than this. That was the fundamental question I asked. There must be more than having to come here every week and drink this beer. And that's what got me started on the journey. In 2015, then, a few months later, when I made the decision, doing the life audit, I cut back on alcohol, done like a 4-week period of sobriety, which was great. It was the first time I'd been sober for more than a week since I was like 12, which was crazy, and really enjoyed the health benefits, but started drinking a little bit more again. Then 2016, started cycling, obviously. Drunk maybe a handful of times, never drunk that much, but it was definitely an improvement from the 3 or 4 times a week. Then in 2017, I done 6 months sober at the beginning of that year. Then when I was struggling with purpose in the summer, I started drinking again. Then in September last year, I decided that I'm finished with it again, done 3 months sober, and then I was on the Camino, and this is one of the most interesting moments in my life. I was on the Camino, about a couple of weeks into it. I was the happiest and healthiest I'd ever been. I was feeling so spiritual. I was on my game pretty much with everything that I was doing in the Camino, and was in a bar one night with some of the people that I'd met, and a guy said to me, "What do you want to drink, Josh?" And I said, "Just get me a cola." And he was like, "Oh, you don't drink?" And I was like, "No, I don't drink alcohol." And he said to me, "What, a Scottish guy who doesn't drink alcohol?" And that hit me right. That I don't think I've ever been triggered more in my entire life by that comment. It really shocked me at my core. And I remember I never drunk that night because I was like, right, I need to wait about this because I'm so all or nothing. I thought, if I'm going to drink again, then I know I'm going to be drinking a lot. So it's like, I'm going to wait and see how this night goes. And I started pondering, and I thought, you know what? That's who I am. Like, I've struggled my whole life with identity, and I never realised it at this point. It was after this moment. But I'd had this identity that I was Scottish. I was so passionate about Scotland and being Scottish. And that night I was like, well, maybe that's just who I am. Maybe I'm just a Scottish guy who drinks, and that's my thing. And that was such a big mistake, but I had to make that mistake.
Yeah.
And I drank the following day and loved it. I had a lot of fun because I'd not drunk in 3 months. Drunk again after that, then the next day, then the next day. Each day I continued to drink. It was like, it was good, then it was like, all right, then it was not so good. Then by the final day, it was like, at the end of the walk, it was like, right, I need a drink. I was going back down a very dark path. And I thought, you know what? I've made the biggest mistake that a Scottish person can make, and thinking that I have to drink alcohol just because I'm Scottish. And that's when I realised, like, that I'd struggled my whole life with identity and never even realised it.
That's what we advocate at One Year No Beer. It's the challenges. It's that personal decision, whether you continue on your alcohol-free adventures like myself or like Rory, drinks occasionally now and in total control. But the key message that you've said there, which is just wonderful, it's about having that awareness of who you are. And once you really understand that, and that's what this alcohol-free adventure's about for me, is actually giving yourself a bit like the Camino of going alcohol-free. It's actually giving yourself a bit of time and space to actually work out who you really are, you know, what it is you enjoy, what your purpose is, what your meaning is, and connecting with that. And the biggest way to smash this alcohol-free adventure is aligning fully with your values and your beliefs. And just before we go, where can we find out more about you? What are you doing now? Where are you? How can we connect with you?
Yeah, so at the moment, what I'm doing is mainly just focusing on my own health and happiness. That's the big priority. I know that to fulfill my purpose of like sharing my journey and helping other people, I have to be the happiest and healthiest I can possibly be. So just a final thing on that conversation we just had there. To me, the reason why it's so easy to be sober now is because I have a reason to be sober. I always struggled in the past to give up alcohol because there was no bigger reason, there was no higher meaning. Now my life's purpose is the driving force in my life, and to me, alcohol is just so not aligned with that. So I don't have to think about it, and that helps so much. So at the moment, what I'm doing is I'm doing a lot of public speaking. I'm creating a lot of video content online, and I'm working on a couple books as well, and sharing a lot of information on social media. I'm just Josh Quigley on social media. If you type that into Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, you'll find me on there.
Legend. That was absolutely brilliant. And as mentioned, I think Rui might get you back on the show at a later date to delve deeper into some of your past, which I think aligns with Rui. But that was absolutely inspirational. I've learned a ton of stuff. But anyway, Josh, thanks very much for coming on the show. You've been an absolute star.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the 1 Year No Beer podcast. For a full list of episodes and to join in the challenge yourself, head on over to oneyearnobeer.com. oneyearnobeer.com.